There's fresh criticism of the ill-fated Titan submersible and the company behind it. A final report from the U.S. Coast Guard comes more than 2 years after the implosion of the OceanGate submersible. It had set out on a dive to the wreckage of the Titanic. Johanna Wagstaff's here with more on this story. So, Johanna, the report has now concluded that this disaster, I guess, was preventable?
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is what you call, Sarah, a damning report. 350 pages after a 2-year-long investigation, as you said, led by the U.S. Coast Guard on the implosion of the Titan. It was preventable, and the death of 5 people on board also preventable. It concluded that the CEO who was on board at the time, the CEO of OceanGate, the company that built Titan, if he had not been killed, Stockham Rush would be facing criminal liability. So the report basically lays out a series of engineering and operational failures that led to the ultimate implosion. I just want to highlight a few of them. First of all, OceanGate's decision to bypass safety protocol. OceanGate used experimental materials to build Titan. This is made out of carbon fiber, very strong material, but it had not been tested at these depths. It also pointed to the unique oblong shape of the Titan, this sort of long shape that normally is not used for submersibles, that probably led to unique stress points in the material. And after 20 dives before the fatal dive, engineers had already pointed out stress points that were patched over. The report also mentions problems with how the business operated, workplace culture using intimidation tactics to bypass some of this safety protocol, all in the name of innovation. That's really where the report was going and the motivation for some of these decisions. And finally, Sarah, I just want to point out that it did mention some responsibility to the U.S. Government because a 2018 whistleblower from an engineer in OceanGate did say that there were safety problems, but that was not pursued. Ultimately, though, this report, a big deal for all of those who lost loved ones and friends 2 years ago. Take a listen.
But at the end of the day, you know, I lost a good friend, and I said to him a few days before, like, PH, you know, you've done it all. Why are you doing this now? Like, why don't you take a break from it? And I didn't point fingers or blame anybody. I'm not doing that. I just felt, you know, in my heart, this wasn't the way to do things.
So those were all of the problems that were, or the highlights of the problems that were issued in that report. There were also 17 recommendations that were made to prevent similar tragedies. Can you give us the highlights of that?
Yes, so this is obviously a tragedy that won't soon be forgotten, but the report is a legacy one when it comes to how extreme tourism and private exploration is done moving forward. Some of the recommendations include an industry working group so that any new projects moving forward that operate in this gray area that OceanGate somehow found between tourism, submersibles, and science is now covered. Every submersible using new technology has to undergo a third-party check, and any submersible diving now has to issue basically a flight plan, a route, and an emergency plan that they've detailed ahead of time with U.S. Coast Guard. So, Sarah, this will now be implemented within the industry, and I think this could be a game changer moving forward.
And something the industry is never going to forget.
Exactly.
Johanna, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, so my next guest is a submersible pilot and a technician. Tim Bulman joins us now. Thank you so much, Tim, for your time on this. This is sort of it's a big day in terms of this story. It's 2 years in the making, and you worked with OceanGate. Were you surprised by any of the findings in this report?
No, not at all. Now, when you say I worked with OceanGate, I have to explain that a little bit. That was in their very early days when they bought their first sub, which was an ABS class sub. I helped do some electrical work on it. At the time, I did notice Stockton was very arrogant, even though, and very cheap, even though he was quite wealthy. He ended up not actually paying me the full amount we had agreed upon for my work, and rather he offered some equipment in return, which wasn't part of the deal, but it just showed the lengths he would go to save money, for one. Yeah. But I didn't work with them later, and I had nothing to do with the Titan submersible.
Absolutely, and I certainly am not, certainly was not suggesting that. You just heard from Johanna there talking about the 17 recommendations in this report. You've gone through them, I guess, and are they enough to keep crew and passengers safe?
Well, I think they are, but if you look at the industry as a whole, aside from that, the whole industry was very safe for many years before that. One of the recommendations was that every sub must carry a voice communication system. Every single reputable sub operator already has that. I can't imagine anybody wanting to dive a sub without having that in place. So that's one of the recommendations that I don't think really needs to be there, because the industry is already using that. There's only one other operator that I know of that runs an unclassed sub, and he runs in Honduras, and he doesn't use voice comms because he doesn't have a surface boat following him. And he says, well, if the sub implodes, I'm dead, and it doesn't matter, which is, I think, maybe what Stockton thought too, but he didn't voice that,
That story you just told there, that's the kind of thing that is going to give members of the public, a bit of shivers that there's someone's out there perhaps operating that way. What have the last 2 years been like for your industry? What happened, of course, to the Titan sparked so much fear and maybe even some judgment from some who would suggest this was just simply too risky. I'm guessing it's been pretty difficult or challenging to communicate, as you said off the top there, that submersible dives, the vast majority of them go off without a hitch and are, quite safe.
Yeah, the rest of the industry was quite upset over it. Obviously there was sorrow at the loss of lives. The whistleblower was actually a good friend of mine. There was other crew that had worked there that I knew, and they all had the same concerns. And their concerns were put off by OceanGate and not really taken seriously and dismissed. But the whole industry as a whole, they're quite safe, and the whole network of people, if they have questions, they'll ask other operators, and communication is quite good amongst the different groups.
Has the image and perception of your industry changed because of what happened to the Titan? It's a story that obviously circulated around the globe.
It has. I've heard from insurance providers that it's very difficult for any new subgroup to get insurance. So really a lot of the people that can afford it are billionaires that have them as toys, or as billionaires that are funding research and filming excursions, I think. But the average tour company wouldn't be able to afford the liability insurance on a sub anymore.
Again, I hear a sort of heaviness in your voice when you talk about that change to the perception of your industry. What do you feel is lost by the fact that this becomes even more inaccessible and perhaps even more scary to anyone who might consider this kind of exploration?
I think it's similar to what the movie Jaws did to diving. A lot of people, say there's no way I would ever go in a sub, but when people do go in a sub, it's life changing. They, excuse me, they really open their eyes to what it feels like to be in a sub and to be in that environment where it's not really claustrophobic in most subs because you have such good visibility in the water. There's nothing like being in a sub.
Yeah, and I can only imagine. Tim, thank you so much for that. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
That's
Thanks.
Tim Bulman, a submersible pilot and a technician.